Late one night in April 2011, on the French Riviera, a security camera outside a budget hotel filmed a middle-aged man in a dark jacket walking across the car park. He is calm, unhurried. He steps out of the frame, into the dark, and no verified human being has laid eyes on Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès from that moment to this. He left his car in the lot. He left the world entirely. 600 miles north, in the quiet city of Nantes, his wife and his 4 children were already dead, wrapped, buried, and hidden under the terrace of the family home, beneath a fresh layer of cement. For 11 days the man had driven calmly across France while the police knew nothing. This is the story of a father who erased his entire family, invented a fairy tale to cover it, and then simply disappeared. And of the one question France has been unable to answer for 15 years, where is he? To understand how this was even possible, you have to understand the family, because on the surface, they were flawless. The Dupont de Ligonnès name carried the whiff of French aristocracy, an old title, a coat of arms, ancestors tangled up with famous poets. Xavier wore the name like a tailored coat. He was charming, devout, well-spoken. A pillar of a conservative Catholic community. His wife, Agnès, was warm and adored, active in her parish and her children's schools. And the children were the kind that make other parents quietly envious. Arthur, 20, the eldest. Thomas, 18. Anne, 16. And the youngest, Benoît, just 13. Polite, musical, church-going. A beautiful, respectable, upper-class family, living at number 55, Boulevard Robert Schumann. That was the picture everyone saw. It was almost entirely a lie. Because behind the coat of arms and the good manners, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès was drowning, and had been for years. The title was real, but the money was not. The aristocratic branch he belonged to had long since run out of fortune. Xavier had no steady career. He described himself as a businessman, a salesman, a consultant. He launched company after company, and almost none of them made money. One firm reportedly existed mostly on paper. For years, the family's comfortable life was funded by debt, by loans, by borrowing from relatives, and by an image that had to be maintained at all costs. And maintaining that image was everything. In his world, appearances were not vanity, they were survival. The private schools had to be paid. The right address had to be kept. The family had to look effortless while the man at its center juggled overdrafts and unanswered letters from the bank. Friends later said they never once suspected. He was too smooth, too confident, too good at the performance. By early 2011, the performance was collapsing. The accounts were empty. A bailiff was circling over an unpaid debt. The bank accounts were being quietly closed, one by one. The lease was ending. For a man whose entire identity was built on never being seen to fail, the walls were closing in. And in January of that year, something else happened. His father died, and Xavier inherited an old .22 caliber rifle. What the investigation would later reconstruct is not the act of a man snapping in a moment of rage. It is something colder. Something patient. In the weeks before the killings, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès prepared, methodically, like a man planning a renovation. In February, he obtained a firearms license. In March, records show he visited a shooting range, again and again, for separate times, practicing with the rifle. He bought ammunition. He researched, he rehearsed. This was a man teaching himself, calmly, how to shoot straight. Then came the shopping list that still makes investigators shudder. He drove hundreds of kilometers, buying in different towns so no single shop would notice the pattern. Rolls of heavy-duty rubbish bags. Adhesive paving slabs. and 40 kilograms of quicklime, the chemical used, for centuries, to break down and hide human remains. He bought it in 4 separate 10-kilo bags, from 4 different shops around Nantes. And in the garden of number 55, quietly, he began to dig. Under the terrace, he prepared graves, before anyone in that house had any idea they would be needed. Upstairs, his wife was posting cheerful messages online. His children were doing homework, planning their weekends, living their ordinary lives. Below them, in the dark, their father was measuring the ground. Investigators believe the killings took place over 2 nights, beginning on the 3rd of April, 2011. According to the autopsies, the victims were first sedated, and then shot, one by one, with the .22 caliber rifle, as they slept. There is no evidence any of them fought, or ran, or knew. It appears they simply never woke up. First, on that first night, Agnès and 3 of the children. And here the account becomes almost unbearable in its detail, because he did not simply hide the bodies. Beside each of them, investigators would find small religious objects, a crucifix, a rosary. Whatever was in that man's mind, he buried his family with the symbols of the faith he had built his whole public life around. But one son was not home that first night. Thomas, the 18-year-old, was away, and so, for a full day, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès lived in a house with the bodies of his wife and 3 children hidden beneath it, and waited for his other boy to come back. When Thomas returned, his father did not act like a man in crisis. He took his son out to dinner. A good restaurant, near Angers, a proper meal, father and son at a table. Waiters later remembered them. The young man seemed subdued, quiet, perhaps unwell. The 2 barely spoke. The bill came to €72. They finished. They drove home. That night, or the next, Thomas became the 5th and final victim, killed the same way as the others. All 5 bodies were wrapped, sealed, and lowered into the graves beneath the terrace. The quicklime was poured. The paving slabs were laid back down. Fresh cement was smoothed over the top. And then the father picked up a pen, because now came the part he had truly planned. The cover story. This is what separates Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès from almost every other case like it. He did not run and hope. He constructed an elaborate, almost novelistic fiction to explain the disappearance of 6 people, and for a crucial stretch of time, it worked. Letters went out, in the days after the murders, in Xavier's handwriting. To relatives. To the children's schools. To Agnès' employer. Each explained, calmly, that the family was leaving, suddenly, urgently. Agnès had resigned. The children were withdrawn from school. The reason? A dramatic one. Xavier, the letters revealed, had secretly been an undercover agent for the American Drug Enforcement Administration. The family had been compromised, and was being relocated to the United States, under witness protection, for their own safety. It was absurd. It was also, for weeks, believed, or at least not questioned. He asked relatives to spread word that the family had moved to Australia. He sent reassuring emails, "Everything's fine, you'll hear more soon." A voicemail to his sister chatting about a trip to the cinema. He was, in effect, ventriloquizing a whole happy family that no longer existed, buying himself time and distance while their bodies lay cooling under the cement. And then he drove. On the 7th of April, a neighbor saw him making trip after trip from the house to his car, loading it with large bags. Then he pointed the metallic blue Citroën south, and for 11 days he moved across France in plain sight, using his own name, his own credit card, checking into hotels like a man on an unhurried holiday. Toulouse. Then the Vaucluse, where he used a false name. Then down toward the Mediterranean, to a town near the coast where he had lived decades earlier, as a young man. He contacted an old girlfriend from that life, she alerted police, but they never met. He was retracing his own past, drifting toward the sea, spending his last euros on cheap hotel rooms along the way. On the 14th of April, in the town of Roquebrune-sur-Argens, he withdrew 30 euros from a cash machine. A surveillance camera caught him doing it, a clear, almost mundane image of a man at an ATM. It would become one of the last photographs ever taken of him. That night he checked into a Formule 1, the cheapest kind of roadside hotel in France, a concrete box off a motorway junction. He paid for a single room. And it is here, in this anonymous place, that the trail of Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès simply ends. In the early hours, the hotel's security camera filmed him one last time, a man in a dark jacket, crossing the car park on foot, walking away into the night. He left the blue Citroën behind in the lot, keys and all. And from that single frame onward, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès was never filmed, never photographed, and never confirmed alive again. Think about the geography of that moment. He was steps from the Mediterranean, in the hills of the Var, dense forest, deep ravines, hundreds of square miles where a determined man could vanish and never be found. Or, just as easily, a train station, a border, a new name. From the moment he stepped out of that frame, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès became a ghost, and the story back home had not even broken yet. It unraveled slowly. The letters were too strange. Relatives grew uneasy, the DEA's story did not survive contact with a single phone call to the actual authorities. On the 21st of April, police finally went to the house at number 55, and began to search the garden. Under the terrace, beneath the fresh cement and the paving slabs, they found them. Agnès and all 4 children, wrapped and buried in the quicklime. Even the 2 family dogs had been killed and buried with them. The perfect family of number 55 had not moved to Australia, or America. They had never left the garden. And the man who had done the burying was, by then, 10 days gone and 600 miles away, or nowhere at all. France woke up to a horror story with no ending. The bodies were found. The graves were found. The killer's identity was, to investigators, never really in doubt. But the killer himself had evaporated. What followed became one of the largest and strangest manhunts in modern French history. His face, the balding man with the glasses and the neat, ordinary features, went up across the country and then the world. An international alert was issued. And the sightings began. Hundreds of them. He was spotted in the mountains. In monasteries. In a café in Provence. Crossing a border. Boarding a ferry. In Britain, in Italy, in the depths of the French countryside. Every few months, for years, a new tip, a new grainy photo, a new burst of certainty, and every single time, it came to nothing. The man simply refused to be found. The strangest chapter came in October 2019. Interpol flagged a passenger flying from Paris to Glasgow whose details matched a stolen French passport. Scottish police made an arrest at the airport. And within hours, the news detonated across France, they had him. After 8 years, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès was finally in custody. French television cleared its schedules. Front pages were held. A nation that had lived with this open wound for nearly a decade held its breath for the confession that was surely coming. And then the fingerprints came back. And the DNA. It was not him. It was a 69-year-old man visiting his wife in Scotland, an innocent traveler caught in the machinery of a legend. The most famous fugitive in France had slipped through their fingers again, without ever having been there at all. So where is he? 15 years on, there are, broadly, two answers, and they could not be more different. The first is the one investigators lean toward, that Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès walked out of that hotel and, somewhere in the wooded hills of the Var, took his own life, in a ravine, a cave, a stretch of forest so remote that his body was simply never found. A man who had lost everything, ending it where no one would ever have to know. It is the quiet, likely answer. The second theory is the one that keeps the case alive in a million conversations. That a man this meticulous, a man who planned for months, who forged an entire fictional future, who bought lime in 4 different shops so no one would notice, did not simply wander into the woods to die. That he engineered an exit, as carefully as he engineered everything else. That somewhere, under another name, perhaps sheltered by the religious networks he knew so well, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès is still alive. Still performing. Still getting away with it. What is not in doubt is what he left behind. 5 people, a wife and 4 children, one of them 13 years old, murdered in their sleep by the person who was supposed to protect them, and hidden in the ground beneath their own home. An entire family erased to protect one man's reputation. Because that, in the end, is the theory that runs underneath all the others, that he did it not out of rage, but out of pride. That he could accept his family dying before he could accept the world seeing him fail. The house at number 55 was eventually sold. New families have walked through its rooms, stood on the terrace, tried to make it ordinary again. The parish moved on. The name, once worn so proudly, became a byword for horror across France. An illegally important truth remains: Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès has never been arrested, never charged in a courtroom, never tried. In the eyes of the law, he is a suspect, presumed innocent, because the one man who could answer for it all has never been made to answer for anything. So here is the question I want to leave you with. We are drawn to this case because of the mystery, the vanishing, the manhunt, the ghost in the forest. But strip that away, and something colder is left. A man sat across a dinner table from his own son, hours before ending his life. He buried his children with rosaries. And he did all of it, investigators believe, to keep a single thing intact: the image. The name. The lie that he was a success. So ask yourself, how well do you really know the most respectable person on your street? And do you think Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès died alone in those woods, or is he still out there, watching this story be told? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe, because the next case is already waiting. Some fences are white. And some of them are hiding a fresh grave in the garden.